We are back on Turning the Tide with Dr. Nancy Kobrin, the author of The Banality of Suicide Terrorism, The Naked Truth About the Psychology of Islamic Suicide Bombing. And that is what we have been talking about today, is the psychology of the suicide bomber and beginning to understand what type of culture produces them. And certainly we've had them here. The Oklahoma City bombing is indicative of that. But we are specifically talking about the Arabic culture, Islam, Sharia law, and how that can and does produce the mentality of a suicide bomber and terrorist as a whole. Now, Nancy, the whole purpose of your book, as I understand it, was that you wanted to somehow begin the re-education of Arab women as early in life as possible to help them understand the value that they hold as a woman and that they are important in life. And that, of course, is necessary because if you want to have healthy children who become healthy adults, you have to have a healthy mother.
Yes, and also to try to shed light on why it is that it's so troubling for us to understand this behavior, because it's sort of creeping into Western culture, the honor killings, and there are a series of things and behaviors. So I think that we were talking too about the Coptic Christians in Egypt and how they were brutally attacked and massacred recently. And I think that part of the extremism is not understood, that there is this intolerance of the other to such a degree that it has to wipe out the other, which will never be enough, because the structure doesn't allow for tolerating difference. So this becomes extremely difficult, and then it's very troubling. Then you have areas where there are no more Christians, or you have Bethlehem, which there are no more Christians, and it's like there's no end to it, and yet in Egypt there's this desire for democracy, but democracy means something very different. And you see also this phenomenon, even in Tunisia, of pulling towards the extremists, like the Muslim Brotherhood, and like what happened when there was the withdrawal, when the Israelis did the withdrawal from Gaza, and Hamas stepped into the gap. I mean, it was predictable in a way, but that it's the most rigid and most extremist, because they provide a kind of structure, in my opinion, that the civic population is lacking because of this lack of structure in the family home, where the boundaries are not clearly defined and the individual is not valued. So it's this catch-22 that we keep on seeing.
Okay, let's take another figure on the international stage that is prominent in the news right now. That's Iran and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. With what you understand about the mentality of Muslims, the mentality of Muslim men, the psychosis, and I do use that on purpose, of that group mentality and of the individual men who are just like an amoeba as a part of a whole. Looking at Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his sole goal in life, is there any negotiating with the man, with his mentality?
Oh, I would hesitate to let me backtrack for a second. Let me say something first about Shia Islam. Shia Islam, in my way of thinking, seems to me to be more hysterical in a way than Sunni Islam, and they are, viewed by the Sunnis as basically being almost heretics. So you have that entire dilemma, but it's a good example where they are Muslims, but they can't even tolerate each other. And let's not forget that Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, and they really gave birth to suicide bombing. So it started in a way with the Shia within this arena. With regard to Iran, I'm not an Iranian Farsi expert by any means, but
But going with your basis and your philosophy.
Ahmadinejad is, he's a Holocaust denier. He's completely paranoid, and he is. It's scary because terrorists tell you what they're going to do, and then they do it. It's a very difficult and complex situation. I'm sitting in Tel Aviv, and there are literally thousands of missiles directed towards Tel Aviv in southern Lebanon. So if you strike Iran, a lot of people are going to die. And I'm speculating, and God forbid it should happen, that people should die. And I'm not, there's been a lot of discussion on the news, obviously here, and drawing parallels to when the Israelis went in to Iraq and took out the nuclear reactors. Is it feasible now? But it's very, very, very complicated, and I would say that from what I understand, the population itself, the people don't want Ahmadinejad, but they have this horribly oppressive regime, and it's very difficult to cast them off their backs. So I don't know how well I've answered your question, but that's kind of my attempt to answer it. And
in other words, he's crazy.
Pardon?
He's crazy.
Yes, exactly. Well,
you can't negotiate with crazy.
Yes, that's part of the problem. There's when you're working with people who are paranoid, you can't really. It's very difficult to negotiate. Very.
Okay, we are down to the last 10 minutes of the interview, Nancy. And
wow. Bye.
I know it did. It was just fascinating, and I understand. I'm so glad that you were able to carve this time out, because all these questions I had, you have answered very amply. But the very last part that I want to talk about is, it's a shame, honor-driven culture. Sharia law is the political structure of Islam. It is the enforcement of Islam. And we look at everything that is going on in the Middle East. We look at the danger that Israel is in. We look at the family unit, which we know if a family unit is damaged and destroyed, a nation follows. And if you look at the Middle East and you look at what you have written in this book, and as a psychoanalyst, you're more than amply qualified to come to this conclusion that the family unit within the Muslim culture is damaged, horribly damaged, but you hope not beyond repair. So tell me, at this point, with all that you have learned and all that you have studied and the theories and hypotheses that you have put together, tell me, what is the hope? How do we turn it around?
I feel that, the last part of the book, I list a series of things that can be done. And the big thing is to focus on shoring up the female in these cultures. Because when, a Somali once told me in Minnesota why he hated the police. And I said, oh, why? Why he hated America? And I said, why? And he said, because as soon as we raise our hand to strike our kids or wife, they pick up the phone and call the police. And I thought to myself, they're getting it, So I think this is...
Well, if they don't like it here, go home.
Yes. This is... but that's probably not going to happen.
I know. But that's my very simplistic approach.
So my sense is to sort of try to engage them. And also, but to engage them by being realistic and not being terrified by the terror, not to let the terror get to us, to know, to call their bluff, to see it like it really is, that suicide bombing is murder-suicide routinely found in domestic violence. This is a problem coming from within their family dynamic, but it's just writ large under political violence, and that it is a stumbling block to creating, if the female continues to be so devalued, they're not going to have viable functioning civic structure. And this also goes for when we're dealing with immigrant populations in our own communities. But it has to come from within that they want to change. So anything to help promote change in a positive direction will be really important. I do want to say one thing about Sharia law. I'm not an expert on Sharia law, and it hasn't gone through a kind of reformation, but there are moderate Muslims out there, and as you well know, it is very hard to leave Islam, nearly impossible.
Yes, it's
yes,
deadly.
It's deadly, and we need to understand that, and we need to engage, and that should be an issue that should be discussable. And when I think of Saudi Arabia, it's outrageous the kind of lives the women lead there, and this is the center of Islam. And at a political level, a lot can be done to pressure them to change their attitude. A lot can, not only attitude, but the fact that there are limits on Christians, churches, and that I, as a Jew, can't go to Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is outrageous in this day and age. And
well, I would say at the beginning, like you said in the book, at the very, very beginning, their attitude towards women has got to change. They need to learn to value them as much as, well, actually, they don't even value themselves, do they?
Exactly. And the change will take place through the women, because once you taste freedom, there's no turning back. And I think that the women are getting it. I'm sure it's very, very terrifying to be in the kind of catch-22 and bind that they find themselves, and it will take time, but it's the key. It is the key.
It is. And that brings us to the end of the show today, Dr. Kobrin. Again, we are talking with Dr. Nancy Kobrin, the author of The Banality of Suicide Terrorism, The Naked Truth About the Psychology of Islamic Suicide Bombing. And it is a fascinating book. It is one I believe every single person in the Western world should read, so that you can begin to understand what we are facing. And it is a monstrous problem. Dr. Kobrin, any last thoughts? You have a minute and a half.
I would just go back to reiterating earlier that it's very important to look at the devalued female in Arab Muslim culture and the ramifications in the relationship to the children, and particularly the kind of traumatic bonding that takes place that then morphs into social bonding in other relationships that particularly lead into engaging in terrorism, and that this is a core issue that is not well understood or discussed. It took me 7 years to get the book into press. It was at 2 different publishing houses before Potomac, and it is very important that we understand how the terrors impact on us so that we sort of remain blind with our head in the sand, because it's too terrifying, the catch-22 and the ramifications. However, we should never give up hope. That is what the terrorists want to take away from us, and that by engaging, sort of using the carrot and the stick, that this is the way to proceed with the problem of terrorism in the Arab Muslim world. And we might not see change in our lifetime, but ultimately I do feel that change will come.
Oh, and I hope you are right.
I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. Your questions are just, they were wonderful. And considering that it was sort of a lonely experience at times writing this book and presenting, it is very heartening to me to have a discussion like this, and I hope that I've been helpful.
Oh, you have, absolutely, and I do want to have you back. So as things happen in the world, and I feel like you can contribute to in a good way for the listeners of Turning the Tide for what's going on, I will definitely contact you. It's been a wonderful conversation on terrorism, suicide terrorism, and the family, the nucleus of the family in Islamic culture. It has been eye-opening, and I do hope that you will spread the word, all my Turning the Tide listeners, spread the word and let everyone know that they need to purchase The Banality of Suicide Terrorism by Dr. Nancy Kobrin. This is Candace Salima on Turning the Tide. Have a wonderful day, and we will catch you tomorrow.